Now that we've got the legendary mixtape from A$AP Rocky on streaming services, it seemed like a good idea to do a decade later for Live, Love, A$AP. A mixtape initially I had issues with getting into, but I think over time with my more exposure to cloudier, hazier hip-hop music, I have certainly become accustomed to this sound. I'm more appreciative of what A$AP Rocky was doing back in 2011 with this mixtape here. His rapping style, these kinds of beats he was rapping over. You could even argue to an extent it might have been a little bit ahead of its time, considering a lot of other artists in this style have pushed further and maybe even arguably have created a more distinct sound with pushing further. You don't necessarily have to agree with that, but I think some people would agree with that, particularly with an artist like Young Lean, for example, who has carved out a very interesting style for himself, and some people would say that his albums and mixtapes are legendary at this point. Not the biggest Young Lean fan myself, but I think, you know, you could point to this style in the early 2010s with Clams Casino's production as being a big part of these artists going forward. What about the music itself though on Live, Love, A$AP? Well, it's sounding really good. Like I say, better than ever. I think this album, as it ages, is really just sounding better and better over time. The trance-inducing, hypnotic, psychedelic sounds of tracks like What's Up, bloody hell man, are just to die for. The heavenliness, is that even a word? I don't know. The heavenliness of Clams's production on tracks like this is just out of this world. As every moment goes by in that track, you just feel yourself getting sucked into it more and more. You find yourself just completely getting lost in Rocky's rapping, and the beat itself just sweeps you up and you're just like taken aback by it all. Reminds me so much of Friend Zone, and by the way, Friend Zone is an incredibly underrated name in hip-hop music. I believe they were a duo and one of the members passed away, I think, but Jesus Christ, Friend Zone dropped actually in the same year as this album here, but the production similarities between what Clams Casino does and Friend Zone does is really, really similar, and I think anyone that champions Clams and doesn't champion Friend Zone is an absolute moronic idiot, because these styles are so close together that anything that sounds like this should be credited to these artists, and Friend Zone is not brought up ever. The druggy atmosphere comes back again with Leaf, of course, Clams on production here. Clams isn't producing every track on this mixtape, by the way, which was something I didn't realise until I was looking at the producer credits, but you can see a stark difference between some of these tracks. They don't all have this cloudy, hazy atmosphere. It's certainly there on the opening track though. I think that immediately sets up the tone of what this mixtape is going to bring throughout, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's there all the time. In fact, a lot of the time you're getting just this really slick, cool, smooth rapping from Rocky over some really good beats. Peso is another track like this as well, with the really laid back style that Rocky brings. It's really cool to listen to. I just love the flows that he comes up with while also just sounding so chill. The tracks like Brand New Guy are just like standard snappy, hard as nails hip-hop tracks. It doesn't have that same cloudy atmosphere to it. Not too keen on the hook on this one, but I think the verses are pretty damn great, especially from Schoolboy Q. I mean, some of the lines he drops are just so dirty and grimy and grim, really, but he sounds great. Similarly with bass, actually, I think the kind of deep, weird voice that comes through just kind of undercuts the song. I think it's sounding really great. It doesn't necessarily need that, and that voice comes through a few times across this mixtape. Maybe not much of an issue for many people. I just think when A$AP is sounding so good over these beats, and then that random voice comes in, it's like, I'm just kind of like a bit put off by it, to be honest. And to be fair, the bass hook on this one isn't the most creative. Houston Oldhead as well is pretty similar with the whole life's a bitch and bitch is a hoe and hoes just want my money thing. To be fair, it's kind of catchy as fuck the way he's kind of rhyming and flowing over that with that hook, but you know, lyrically not really the best I think he could have come up with. Feels like a bit of a caricature of, like, you know, what people think hip-hop is about with, you know, the lyrics. I mean, he's kind of living up to the stereotype with this one, really. Not great with the words here, but I kind of still enjoy how it sounds. To be fair, you could say that for most of this album, really. I mean, the way it sounds is just so well crafted, and I think, you know, it's aging so well, as I've already said, 10 years on, and this actually sounds better than it did when I first heard it. I didn't hear it initially in 2011. I wasn't listening to this kind of music at all back then, but I think I heard it in like 2013, 2014. I think, you know, 7, 8 years on, this is definitely sounding better to when to when I initially first heard it. Tracks like Triller are so hard, this track is just like a Pusha T track, really. I mean, holy shit, the way this beat is put together. Again, just such a banging track compared to some of the hazier, cloudier, atmospheric moments on here. And Jesus Christ, does it not stand out in a bad way at all. It stands out in the best kind of way. And even Roll One Up as well, catchy as hell. The variety of different kinds of tracks that he's giving you on just one mixtape here is goddamn impressive. You gotta remember, this is only a mixtape. And yeah, this track right here is a weed anthem. The best weed anthem there is out there. Again, lyrically, hardly going to put this one on a pedestal, but Jesus Christ, I just think it is just so catchy that I don't really care too much. Similarly with Sandman, I'm not entirely sure if Sandman is even a track for the mixtape or it's a bonus track. I'm not entirely sure. I don't see this one listed when you look at the official track listing, but it is on the new streaming version of LIVE.LOVE.A ASAP. So do we count it? I'm not really sure, but I want to count it anyway because this track is just so catchy. Even without that particular track, this mixtape just flourishes for me. I think it's so hard to view his discography in such a positive way when he started so strong, and everything after it just hasn't lived up to this mixtape. I don't know if anyone would agree with that, but for me, many of the albums that I've heard from him up until this point just are not on the level of what he did here, and the capability of his talents is obviously there, and there's a lot of great songs throughout his discography. I've always seen him as more as like a one-off banger kind of artist. So yeah, very good mixtape. Probably should have had it somewhere at least as an honourable mention in my mixtape list video that I did for the 2010s, maybe even cracking into the top 20, but you know, at least I'm saying now that it's very good and it's getting better as time goes on. Not every track hits, but I still think most of the tracks here are really, really good, worth your time, and it's just aging really nicely. Not all the lyrics are very good, but you know, we love Playboy Carti and none of his lyrics ever make sense, so it is what it is. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you think it's doing well with age, or you think it's gotten worse, or you think it's still as good as it was. What your favourite album / mixtape from this man is, if you think it's his best or you think he's put out better since. I personally don't think he has, but would love to see what you guys think. Subscribe if you could. Thank you as always, and goodbye.